Milton Friedman famously said, "You cannot simultaneously have free immigration and a welfare state." Economist Bryan Caplan begs to differ. Caplan makes his case in his latest book, Open Borders, The Science and Ethics of Immigration. It's a graphic novel he co-produced with artist Zach Weinersmith, who's best known as the creator of the popular webcomic Saturday Morning Breakfast Cereal. The book takes on all the arguments against open borders, one by one, from concerns about assimilation, terrorism, and fairness to Friedman's oft-quoted libertarian objection. Caplan sat down with us to talk about why immigration works, if he thinks he'll see open borders in his lifetime, and why he likes to pick fights in his books. Bryan Caplan, you seem to love to pick fights. Basically, all of your books have been insanely controversial topics. This one is no exception. Open borders is generally considered a radical idea. Are you a radical?
Yes, I am. But especially I'm someone who figures that if it's a conventional idea, someone else will write the book, or the book's already written 20 times. So I feel like my value added is to find the orphan topics. Topics where they have great merit, position has great merit, but almost no one else loves them, and I like to adopt them and say, look, I love you, I will raise you, I will make you strong, and then I will unleash you on the world and let the world see how much they should have given you, how much credit they should have given you, how quickly they were to dismiss you when actually this was a great idea. So yeah, that's really what I do with all my books, is I try to find ideas that otherwise probably the book wouldn't be written at all. And then I write the book. And for me, that's very motivating, because it's the thought of, if I don't do this, no one will. And that's why I pick the topics I do.
Have you always been in favor of open borders, or did you have a conversion moment?
Let's see. So when I was in high school, I actually had to write an essay on immigration for my bioethics class. And I was definitely not in favor of open borders then. I was someone who basically said immigration's good as far as it goes. We need better assimilation. So when I actually changed my mind, probably it was actually just reading libertarian authors and saying this isn't a proper role for government. But what really radicalized me was not the philosophy. It was actually seeing what researchers were saying about the actual gains of open borders, because there's so many different policy reforms you could talk about. But what really counts? What would make an enormous difference in the quality of life for large numbers of people? One of the biggest things, in fact, the biggest result that you can get out of empirical research is no one in economics has ever come up with a better policy reform than radical liberalization of migration, because there's so much human talent that goes to waste in countries where they aren't able to accomplish much, and they could just move freely to another country. People could do so much more. They could lift themselves out of poverty by their own bootstraps, but the law doesn't allow it. So work by researchers like Michael Clemens. He has this famous piece subtitled $1 trillion Bills on the Sidewalk. And that's what got me thinking, not only is this a good idea, but it's an incredibly important idea. And since very few people are pushing it, I should be someone that does it.
Why a graphic novel? Why would you make this sort of abstruse academic argument in graphic novel form?
So several reasons. So one of them is that a lot of the arguments that I make about open borders involve thought experiments. And I found thought experiments just work a lot better if you can see them rather than just picture them in the eye of the mind. Also, I noticed from reading a lot of these nonfiction graphic novels, because I'm a voracious reader of this stuff, that the very best of them don't give a simplistic, low-level story. Instead, the very best of them combine words and pictures, just convey a lot of information extremely economically. And I wanted to model myself after the greats, like Larry Gonick, whose Cartoon History of the Universe in 5 volumes is a fantastic work. And I would just make it the textbook for history across the whole world if I were given that power. So, I just realized that there was so much opportunity to go and combine words and pictures to convey a lot of information very readily and in a short amount of time. And then, finally, it was just something very different, and I thought it was really fun. And I was thinking, if I could do this, wouldn't this be a great experience for me? Now, there's a problem I can't draw, which is where Zach Weinersmith comes in. He also added probably about 1 out of 5 jokes. But again, since he's also a professional humorist as well as an artist, a lot of his role was to tell me my jokes did not suck. And so people say the book's funny. Of course, the author's going to say that. But this is a funny book. Read it. It's true.
In the opening of the book, you do have a sort of historical section where you look back at the history of immigration restriction in this country, and you say, one reason we know that open borders can work is because we had them essentially until really the 20s.
Yeah.
That argument I have attempted to make in similar conversations, I find that you get the instant response, but things are different now. So, Bryan, aren't things different now?
So they are. As to whether that makes immigration better or worse is a very interesting question. I deal with this later in the book. So, on the question of assimilation, many people have rightly said, well, now it's a lot easier to move to a country and then use modern communications and transportation to not really adapt to the new country. And that's true as far as it goes. However, modern communication and transportation have also already moved Western and especially American culture outwards to the rest of the world. So you can see things like now there's about 1 billion people who don't live in countries that are officially English-speaking and yet speak fluent English. In 1900, it would not have been so. In 1900, a Sicilian migrant is going to show up at Ellis Island speaking probably no English, never having seen electricity maybe. And now you'd be hard-pressed to find anyone in the whole country of Italy that is so out of touch with modern culture. So what I call this pre-assimilation, I say that what we have in the modern world is a lot more pre-assimilation, where immigrants are already not only linguistically, but culturally and economically adapted to life in more advanced countries, so they really can hit the ground running. But I'll also say there's a big difference between a policy that's never been done and a policy that was very successful for a very long time and then stopped. And especially why I think the history does matter is that it's very hard to find anyone, including the most ardent immigration restrictionists, who think that it was a good idea to stop the immigration in the way that it was done. Almost everyone, looking back, will say, all right, the complaints they had then were off base, and yet the complaints are so similar to the complaints now, and they made sense to people at the time, which really should make you wonder, could there be some built-in human bias towards xenophobia and pessimism that leads human beings to overrate the dangers of immigration, such that when you have some distance and perspective, you see how silly the complaints are, but when you are caught up in the moment, you have trouble accepting that maybe you could be wrong.
You said earlier that it was reading various libertarian thinkers that kind of brought you into the open borders mindset, but there are certainly plenty of libertarians, self-described libertarians, who don't favor open borders. You address some of those arguments in your book. They're literal, they're not straw men, I guess, they're stick men, but they're little stick figures in taxation is theft t-shirts who are clamoring across your lawn. Given our expected viewership here at ReasonTV, could you talk a little bit about those arguments and your replies to them?
Sure. So there's two sets of arguments that we can think about here that libertarians have made. So the kind of arguments that I think are terrible, and fairly clearly so, are the ones saying, look, well, just as I can exclude people from my house, America can exclude people from the country because this is our collective property. And in my reply to people like this is, if that's what you think, you really shouldn't be a libertarian, because if that's what you think, then you have no principled objection to anything government does. People are not allowed to set up a church inside my house. Therefore, government should be able to decide what religions are able to be practiced here. You can't set up a store or an export-import firm inside of my house. Therefore, it should be the people of the United States that decide which businesses to license and which countries we get to trade with, and so on. So if you really think that the country collectively belongs to the citizens, and we, the people, have the right to do with this country what we want, then you have abandoned any kind of a principled libertarian argument. Certainly, you don't have a right to have a gun in my house, right? So why should you be able to have a gun in America if America doesn't think that you should? So anyway, that's a kind of argument that is popular with people who like principled philosophical arguments, although I think it's just such a terrible argument, and one where the people are making it on such an ad hoc basis, where it's only for that purpose they ever make the argument. They would never allow government to do anything else by the same logic. Now, the libertarian arguments that I think are vastly better, and I try to address them with great seriousness, are especially ones saying, first of all, that due to the welfare state, we can't afford to let immigrants in because it would break the bank. Right, so there's that one, and Milton Friedman, as many libertarians keep emailing me as if I've never heard of it, but yes. So
have you heard of this guy, this Milton Friedman character?
Milton Friedman in the book tells me the quote that I have heard from many other libertarians saying, essentially, you cannot have free migration and a welfare state. Right, so I have a chapter where I just go over the numbers, say, well, it depends. It's complicated. You can't do this kind of math in your head. You've got to actually do the slow, painstaking, boring work of crunching the numbers, or at least reading the slow, boring, painstaking work that other people have done. And in that chapter, I come away saying, look, we can imagine a welfare state so generous that it would break the bank, but the U.S. is not such a welfare state for a bunch of reasons, which I'm happy to go into. And then the argument that I take as much more serious is maybe the immigrants are going to come from countries where they love liberty even less than Americans do and are going to vote to turn us into Venezuela or something like that. So, this is an argument where I understand the logic of it, but it comes down to an empirical question. Is it really true that non-native people in this country are that bad? If we go and look at subgroups, or we try to figure out how would the composition of immigrants change if anyone who wanted to could come, like how bad would that be? And so, I just go through the data there and I just say, look, there may be some small effect, but it is not even in the right ballpark to justify this extreme violation of human freedom, which is what immigration restrictions really are. This is not like saying that you're not allowed to go and have a bonfire in your backyard or something like that. This is something where you are taking billions of people who would like to move from desperate poverty to the first world to get a job and rent an apartment, to capitalist acts of seemingly uncontroversial pedigree, and say, well, tough luck, you're stuck in Haiti, right? And why? Because you don't have a piece of paper from the government. So, in my mind, to get mad that you can't go and cut hair without a license, but look at the way that the U.S. government treats would-be Haitian immigrants and say that's fine. It is a great and bizarre feat of moral blindness.
And your case, for the most part, rests on the argument for increasing legal immigration, although you do address the various iterations of illegal immigration over the years. Because I do think that's the other place where sometimes you get libertarian disagreement is, okay, maybe more migration would be good. Maybe it would be good for people, be good for the country. But what about the rule of law?
Right. And, for that, what I say is, when someone says I'm against illegal immigration, someone says, I am totally against it too, because I think it should be legal. Right now, I have found that it's a totally unpersuasive argument, because most people who are worried about illegal immigration, it's not just the fact that it's illegal that bothers them. They think the law serves a good purpose. Something I don't think I actually talk about that much in the book, but I have blogged on it, is when exactly is it that a law is sufficiently bad that it's okay to break it? All right, now there's a knee-jerk reaction of you should never break the law no matter what. And I think sometimes even your rule of law libertarians will say this. And then for them, I would say, okay, so you always ride the speed limit? Every single time? You never go a mile over the speed limit? And then it's like, so, all right, fine, I do, right? Well, are you doing something evil? Right? And for this, it's like, well, here's the thing. It would be kind of inconvenient to drive the speed limit, so it's okay to break the law. It's like, well, it's okay to break the law for just a matter of inconvenience. Then how about if the law is trapping you and your children in dire poverty when all you want to do is move to Miami and shine shoes? Is it okay to break that law? Right? And, to my mind, the case for breaking immigration laws is much stronger than the case for speeding. The speeding laws actually serve some very plausible social function, right? And the harm that you could do to someone from driving too fast, it really is a very serious one, and it's a small cost to you. So that was the kind of thing that maybe libertarians should bend on. But for this, when you're saying, look, you have no right to live anywhere in the first world, no right to do any job in the first world, tough luck, you're born in Haiti, too bad, suck it up. That's the kind of law where for libertarians to stand up for that seems very odd to me.
So in addition to sort of answering these libertarian arguments, you also, I think, like one page each, just bang through the basic ethical and moral systems available. So you do a utilitarian argument, you do a Kantian argument, you kind of hit all of those. And then there's a moment in this book where, after you have devastatingly established the case for open borders, you say, okay, but we might not get open borders. So now let's talk about what else we can do. And you call them keyhole solutions.
Right.
Why do you call them that?
I'm actually borrowing this from economic journalist Tim Harford. And so he notes that it's standard in modern surgery to try to not do a lot of extra damage to the patient while you are helping them. So, old school Civil War surgery just involves hacking off body parts and hoping that you don't get more gangrene. But in modern surgery, you'll usually try to do the smallest incision you can to address the very specific problem so you don't wind up causing further harm in the process of fixing whatever was bothering you in the first place. And Tim Harford said, similarly, for a lot of different policies that we have, we can usually think of a cheaper, more humane way of dealing with the problem. So, there's things like what to do about air pollution. You could go and write a phone book's worth of regulation, or you could go and say there's a tax on pollution and you can do as much as you want, but you have to pay for it, which then gives people incentives to always be looking for better and cheaper ways to reduce pollution, and gives incentives for innovation to figure out better ways of doing it so that you can then sell those products. So it's much better in terms of cleaning up things at a low cost, right? And then similarly for immigration, borrowing Tim's idea, I said, why don't we go and listen to complaints and try to figure out cheaper, more humane ways of addressing the concerns. Again, things like Milton Friedman's story, you can't have unrestricted immigration in a welfare state. All right, great. Let's just take that for granted and say, how about we go and let immigrants in, but we give them reduced access to benefits for a while, which, by the way, we already do to some extent. So it's not like a science fiction idea. Rather, it's one that is already on the books, and we just turn up the dial to a higher level until people finally calm down. So, and I talk about this for many other concerns people have. But again, in each case, the idea is, first, listen to the complaint. What exactly is it that's about immigrants that's bothering you? And then second, is there any way of addressing this problem other than saying, kick them out and keep them out?
Right. And this is actually something that I was struck by in that last section. It seems like you spent much more time reassuring readers or reminding them that the status quo was already morally worse, or that we were already doing the thing that you might intuitively see as morally objectionable in these various solutions. I mean, I found even as I was reading, you said, okay, sure, let's let people in, but give them, fewer access to social services. Let's only let some subset of people in from a region or, a culture. And I had what I imagine is a very common intuitive reaction of like, wait, that's not fair. And both before and after each argument, you sort of said, we're already doing this. My thing is still better. Why did you feel like that section of the book needed those reassurances when the much more radical arguments earlier in the book didn't, or you didn't do it as much?
Right. So in the first 5 chapters of the book, I'm trying to convince people of what I think. In the next chapter, I'm trying to bargain with people that I have failed to convince. That's really what's going on, right? And, I'm an economist and I'm a parent, so I'm used to the idea of bargaining with people and trying to say, all right, what exactly is it that is keeping us from getting your signature on the page? And so that's what I'm really trying to do in that chapter.
Let's close by talking about the dedications to the book, which I thought were very striking. Tell me about yours, and then if you can, tell me a little bit about Zach's.
My wife got out of communist Romania when she was 6 years old and then was stuck in Italy for another 6 months while the US government tried to figure out whether she and her dad were spies. Right? And like her family, it was a classic immigration story. They came to this country with nothing. Her dad, especially, he had been a manager in an electrical plant when he was back in Romania, and then at the U.S. he's 43 and has to learn a new language and be a janitor, right? And he did all this so that his daughter could have a better life. And so I dedicated the book to my wife and her family for being part of this country's story, and it's just for being an example of the kind of people that so many people say should not be allowed here because they're not good enough for us. And why do you think they're not good enough? What exactly is it about them that is so horrible that you don't want them breathing the same air as we do? And then for Zach, so my co-author had family in Poland and the former Soviet Union, and some of them got out before the U.S. immigration laws made that almost impossible, and he is descended from that branch of the family. And then the rest stayed, and as far as you can tell, they all got murdered by either the Nazis or the communists. And so he actually put out a request, if anyone knows of any surviving relatives of mine who might have made it out or somehow kept their head down, if you could just let me know.
Have you gotten anything back about that?
I don't think that he has, unfortunately, but maybe some viewer at Reason will know where the long-lost branches of the Weinersmith family have ended up.
So final question, do you think that you will live to see open borders or anything that closely approximates it?
Let's see, how old am I again? No. It seems highly unlikely. So, a big part of my work is distinguishing between what should happen and what I actually think will happen. So, honestly, I'm just one person. I think this is a book that is very persuasive as far as books go, but the most persuasive book in the world just isn't that persuasive to most people, unfortunately. I wish I could do better. If someone else knows how to be more persuasive, that would be really good. This is my best shot. I think it's the kind of thing where you've got to win people over very gradually. You got to focus on the young because older people have generally just locked down and made up their mind. And actually, I will say I feel better about the fact this is the only book I've ever seen where my little kids were reading over my shoulder. So this is a book, actually, while it is written for adults and yet people who are much younger. I'd say precocious 7-year-olds could read the book with profit. So, of course, I have dreams and fantasies about a whole nation of children read this book. And so then within 25 years, they've won things over, and we do get this. My honest answer is, I think open borders will happen eventually, but unfortunately it'll happen after the world is so rich that most of the gains are no longer there.
And on that pessimistic, optimistic note, thank you very much, Bryan Caplan.
Thank you very much. Always a great pleasure.